Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 37,881 people from 160 countries and is supported by 527 organisations worldwide. So it's quite a lot of organisations have signed this declaration and support this women's sex-based rights. We've got new organisations this week are Best Up, APS Matriculture, Associación de Mujeres Feministas Radicales de Andalucía, West 4B Movement, and Protect and Teach. And so for each of these organisations, they've got it together to read the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, have a look at the website, look at the work we've been doing, and think that it's going to be helpful to put their name behind it. And it's quite a big thing because, as we know, defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology can get you cancelled. So we're really, really grateful to have these 527 organisations supporting our fight, and also all of the signatories, 37,881. We have volunteer activists from all over the world, and we have country contacts from many countries. And so do join us if you haven't already sort of got involved in a volunteering capacity or as a country contact, sort of keeping our network involved and knowing about what's going on in each country. When lockdown was called in Britain, 2 weeks later, we started Feminist Question Time, so 2020, and it might have been next week or this week, the actual 4-year anniversary. So let's say it's 4 years. We've had a wide range of speakers. We have breakout rooms after the meetings where you can discuss face to face. And we believe this is a really useful, unique time for feminism to exist, to take place. And I suppose in Mary Daly's terms, we would say this is a meta-patriarchal space. It's an online form of international consciousness raising, and we're building connections and trust. We've got this common understanding. So unlike some organizations or platforms that you can go to where you don't know what the politics is and you come along and you sort of listen to things, because we've got the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, we've got a very clear position, so you can understand where we're coming from and what our politics is. So that's really good. So if you haven't read it or signed it, do have a look. And I'd also add that we've been worried about transgender ideology for a long time. Many of us having read Jan Raymond's book, The Transsexual Empire, in 1979. So we're not surprised that this has been happening. I mean, we are a bit shocked at how widespread it is, but we radical feminists like Janice Raymond and many of us had an understanding of the threat of gender identity ideology a long time ago, and also how it links in with other patriarchal attacks on women. I'd just like to mention before we start that we have an international conference, an in-person conference, 20th and 21st of July in London. And it would be fantastic if you came along. I'll put links in so you can sign up if you can come. Now, I'm really pleased for today's webinar that we have Emeritus Professor Bronwyn Winter from Australia/France, and she's going to be talking about sorting our left from our right, Australian feminists for women's rights. And then we're going to have Nicolette Szagmeiszter, also known as Nicolette Hoffman, from Hungary, and she's going to talk. The title of her talk is Campaigning for Nikki's Law in the EU, Why the EU Legislator Cannot Enslave Primary Caregiver Mums any longer. And if we have time, I'm going to read an article that I wrote, which is called Three-Way War on Women. Without further ado, I'm really pleased. I'm going to introduce Bronwyn. And so Bronwyn Winter has been a radical lesbian feminist activist and researcher for several decades in Australia and France, and a little bit in the UK as well. and transnationally. Among other things, she brought to Susan Hawthorne her idea for a transnational feminist anthology on 9/11, which became the world's first such anthology, co-edited by Susan Hawthorne and Bronwyn, and featuring over 90 different articles, statements, and even some poems. So thank you so much for being with us today, Bronwyn. And the title of your talk is Sorting Out Our Left from Our Right, Australian Feminists for Women's Rights. So over to you.
So AFORWA, which is our acronym, AF figure 4 WR, pronounced AFORWA. I like that because it has the idea of forward in it, and we like to think we're moving forward, not backwards. So Australian Feminist Women's Rights, we came together out of exasperation. So it happened a couple of years ago. We had a federal election in Australia on May 21st, and the Australian Labor Party won, not by a landslide, because there were a lot of independents, sort of centrist independents who won a lot of seats from the Liberals, sort of dividing the left vote a little bit. But they won by a very significant majority. They got 77 seats. The Liberal National Party coalition got 58, and then you had the crossbench had about 16. So they did win by a fairly significant victory. Now, in the lead up to that election, we had a captain's pick of candidates in the Liberal Party in New South Wales, a captain's pick being when the executive of the party sort of swoops in and undermines the democratic processes of pre-selection for election. That happens not just in the Liberal Party, it's happened in the Labor Party as well. In this particular case, the captain's pick was a political novice by the name of Catherine Deves. Some of you will have heard her name. She co-founded Save Women's Sports Australasia and tweeted quite prolifically about trans ideology at that time. And she then decided she announced with great fanfare that she was going to stand for pre-selection in the Liberal Party. She went quite public about that, which was sort of against party rules, but never mind. And she became a captain's pick because she stood on a platform solely of around gender identity ideology, and that was really what she pushed forward. So she was a candidate on that issue, and specifically on that issue. And the hard right Liberal Prime Minister at the time, a man by the name of Scott Morrison, decided that, oh, whoopee-doo, we can make this a political football, we can make this a wedge politics issue, let's pick Kath Deves. She's very pretty, mother of 3 girls, they play sport, lives in Manly, very picturesque Sydney suburb. There are lots of photographs of her posing in front of the water with, you know, revealing clothes and so on, looking very pretty. And so they said, yeah, let's choose her. Now, that sort of made the issue into a political football, because on the other side of the left, we had the Greens leader, Adam Bant, very dug in, saying transgender rights are non-negotiable, transgender rights are not up for debate, and blah. The Labor Party, whenever approached about the question, dodged the issue as much as it possibly could, although a couple of statements by the current Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who also happens to be my local rep, sort of gave the impression that he pretty much agreed with us, but he wasn't, the Labour Party wasn't going to go near the issue because it was going to derail the rest of the election and everything else the Labour Party wanted to do. So that sort of put us in a very difficult position, because a lot of women who came to feminist consciousness in a way, or probably still haven't come to feminist consciousness, but some of them around the gender ideology issue, were very supportive of Catherine Deves' candidature, because they were so sick of the left just sort of jumping on this sort of trans train and not really wanting to be seen as progressive, and sort of betraying the women who'd voted for them. A lot of them were members of the Greens as well. We had a big debate around the same time around an elected convener of the state Greens, Linda Gale, also being ousted through a sort of pro-trans campaign. So there was a lot of stoush within the Greens about it as well, and a few people got expelled from the party. So so that's the situation we're in, where the right wing were grabbing hold of this with both hands, saying this is our issue, rah, 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 we're going to oppose gender ideology. You know the story, it happens in Europe as well. It has happened throughout the EU, where feminism and gay rights and gender ideology get put in together, although the right in Australia was a little bit smarter about how it did that, because, you know, it didn't touch gay rights or women's rights, or it sort of claimed to be the defender of women's rights, which it absolutely is not, as we know. So that's the situation we're in. And we had the Greens, who were supposed to be the most progressive party, being very aggressively pro-trans. And so a few of us feminists on the left, having endless arguments with women online about this, decided that we were sick of it. There was no, apart from Feminist Legal Clinic in New South Wales, which is explicitly of the left and does very good work and is explicitly women only, has done a lot of work on, well, the Feminist Legal Clinic is based in New South Wales, but it's national. They've done a lot of good work. There was no organisation that actually had feminist in its name, for one thing, and took a very explicit left-wing stand on this. So another woman and I came together, and I can't mention her name publicly because she's at risk in her workplace, but we're the co-conveners. We came together and set up this group. We instantly had women clamoring to join us. Yes, we want to join. We want to join. We're not incorporated. We're almost incorporated. We're all doing this on a volunteer basis, and we're constantly responding to events. So incorporation is taking a little while. But we said, no, we want to actually, we cherry-picked a few women, which sort of, doesn't sound very democratic or inclusive, but we wanted to get shit done. We wanted to get stuff done. We wanted to lobby the Labour Party. We wanted to, because we were pretty confident that the Labour Party was going to win government because that's how things were trending. And that's sort of what we wanted as well. We didn't want the right wing to win government again. So we thought, okay, this is our opportunity to lobby the Labour Party. So that's what we did. We came together as a group, and actually the first action we engaged in was support of Linda Gale and the Greens. And to support Linda Gale, we rapidly had to find a name for ourselves when we sort of barely got together. So that's how we became Australian Feminists for Women's Rights. The first action we did was we authored a myth-busting dossier. And we kept it to 10 myths. There are many myths about transgender, as you well know, but we kept it to 10, and each myth had a couple of pages devoted to it. And we sent it in hard copy, very nicely bound, to the Prime Minister, and just after, in August 2022. So a few months after they were elected, we sent it to the Prime Minister and 22 other federal ministers. And because, a couple of them just blew us off, and most of them didn't reply at all, not even to acknowledge that they received it. So, that was sort of, to be expected, but it was rather discouraging. So then we went to the media. We gave them a bit of time to reply. We nudged them again by email. They still didn't reply. So we went to the media, did a press release. Silence from the media. So they thought, oh, this is a great start. This is lots of fun. So we ended up doing media releases a lot about lots of things that were going on in this space. And we also did a number.
Bronwyn, can I just butt in and ask when was this? You might have said, but I didn't follow.
It was in
2022. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. It's so interesting, but I just wanted to get the date. Okay.
We just wanted to get away from this political. So we've been in existence for a couple of years, yeah. We wanted to get away from this political football, the right making it its sort of battle horse, and the left either dodging the issue, which is the case of most of Labor, or at least at federal level, or getting behind the trans agenda, which is the case of the Greens and some of the more moderate crossbenchers. It's been very frustrating. And within I know when Kelly J. Keane came to Australia with her Let Women Speak tour last year, we had, even within our group, we were about, 12, 13 women in the core group. We have lots of friends and supporters, but that's the core group at the moment. When we become incorporated and open to membership, we imagine the numbers will grow. But at the moment, that's where we're at. And I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. Core group, 13 women. What was I about to say? Can't remember. Never mind. Oh yes, when Kelly J. Keane. Within the core group, we had some difference of opinion as to the advisability of this tour and the politics of Kelly J. Keane within the group. So we decided that as an organisation, we were going to support women's right to speak, but publicly distance ourselves from the organisation of the tour. So we weren't involved with the tour. We supported women's right to speak. it's, you know, it's still the value of Kellie J. Keane and her effectiveness and her politics is still a matter under discussion with the forward. We decided we were going to be neutral in relation to her and her tour. And some women are in our group spoke as individuals in her events. You probably heard of what happened in Melbourne, where Nazi groups stormed the podium, and then it got widely reported in the press and by certain political members of the political class across the spectrum, Liberal Party, Labor Party, and Greens in the state of Victoria, as, you know, we were somehow pro-Nazi. You know, anybody critical of gender ideology was somehow pro-Nazi. So that's the sort of spin the left was putting on it, and even parts of the right, moderate right. So the Kellie J. Keane tour was sort of a bit of a problem for us, but we still defended her right to speak. It's been, and we understand women's absolute desperation to have a public platform, to get up there, have the microphone and say their piece. I'm not sure personally how effective the Kellie J. Keane tour was in Australia, how much consciousness raising it did, how much consciousness raising of the sort we might have liked to see in Australia it did, because she was supported by CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference. And those of you from the US know very well who those people are. They're not our friends. It was, and subsequently Moira Deeming, who is a Liberal Party politician in the state of Victoria, who's been very active in the gender critical space as well. She also spoke at one of their events. So this creates problems for us because Moira Deeming is also a religious conservative. She's against abortion. Kath Deves called when we had the referendum on an Indigenous voice to Parliament in Australia last year, which is a forward. We all strongly supported, which I personally strongly supported, and ended up getting in arguments with women about it. Kath Deves called it a coup d'etat. She said that the Indigenous voice to Parliament would be a coup d'etat, and it was just to constitutionalise an advisory body. It wasn't a big deal. It was a very, very small thing. And so that those sorts of fracture lines, Kath Deves also spoke at the Australian Monarchist Conference beside people from the extreme right. So, you know, this then starts to become extremely problematic for us. And it's more and more apparent that in the so-called gender critical space, in a forward, we're actually not gender critical, we're gender abolitionist. And I think that's the case of most of you here in WDI as well. We don't have a gender, we're gender abolitionist. And but a lot of women in the gender critical space, as I said before, sort of became piqued by the trans thing, as we say, but didn't really have a broader feminist consciousness or analysis or politics within which to situate their objections. In a forward, we don't want to be single issue feminists. This has taken up most of our time and energy at this point in time, but we see ourselves as feminists beyond and around this issue. One of the things we feel very strongly about is violence against women. Who doesn't in the feminist community? And we also feel very strongly about the way the family court has been truncated and diminished in Australia and is not adequately fulfilling its original functions. And that's a whole other sort of subject that I won't go into now, but that's something we also want to start working on. We've done a number of submissions. One of our submissions was also on the Federal Human Rights Framework. That was last year. We did a very lengthy submission of 70 pages. You can download it from our website. I'll put the website details in the chat and our Twitter handle as well, X handle, in the chat a little while later. We did a very, very long submission. It wasn't just about the gender and sex stuff, although part of it was about that. It was about refugee rights. It was about institutionalizing the Paris Principles and making them operative in Australian law, arguing in favor of freedom of speech and assembly for all, which we haven't got inscribed very strongly in Australian law, and so on and so forth. So we do have a much broader remit than gender identityology per se. We know we're feminists for a reason. We know what that means. Most of us come from a radical feminist base. Some of us are members of the Labor Party. Some of us are former members of the Greens, and some of us are not members of political parties. So, and we're also trying to work on getting maybe a Labour Women's Declaration like the one in the UK happening in Australia as well. But the UK women are far ahead of us on that one. So there are many, many things we want to do. There are very, very few things we have time to do. And we're consistently dealing with this frustration of this left versus right political football thing, and the fact that some women, how can I put this kindly? Some women don't really have sufficient analysis to understand that the right are not our mates. Just because they say they're critical of gender ideology, they just want to return us to a conservatism where girls are real girls and boys are real boys, and that's the way it is. And even if we'll sort of tolerate homosexuals, we'll tolerate them, and that's okay, as long as they don't rock the boat too much, yeah?
In Britain, we so the stuff, but I think it's some of these podcasts or videos are global. They're increasingly hosted by men, and there are a lot of right-wing men, say GB News or The Spectator, who are reading up. I mean, there's loads of them, aren't there? That loads of right-wing men have their own position, which is, as you say, quite a conservative or religious position, and they believe that women are different from men, biologically different, and they agree with us, or they oppose transgender ideology. But they're being very, very quiet at the moment about what they think our role is going to be after we win the revolution. What I've noticed is they will argue against transgenderism, and they'll say it's of the left, and so they're anti-left, and they often don't believe in climate change, or they want hierarchies and stuff. And then what they do is they want to appeal to us, but they're very, very silent on what they actually think our role is going to be later. I think they're going to, if we win this, they will say, look, we, the right-wing men, we won, and you women back in your home. And one podcast I was watching a while ago, two of these men were chatting, and one of them said, yes, being religious, we think women should be, they've got this special motherhood role, or, so they are naturally submissive. And the other right-wing man said, no, we don't talk about that in public. We're not going there. We're not talking about this thing. And so they really are absolutely not our allies, but and they're quite sophisticated in their making sure that, or trying to cover up what they actually would do or want from us. So I think that the critique of the right is very useful.
First, I never ever said for 1 second that I thought the ALP were great, that they were our friends all down the line, that they were going to stick up with us, and they were going to stand and defend all our rights. We know as women that the party political machine is not on our side. However, if I have to choose...
Maybe just speak quite a bit more slowly. And is the
machine,
ALP the Australian Labour Party?
It is. The party political machine is not on our side, we know that. But between the devil and the deep blue sea, I'm going to choose the deep blue sea because I can swim. And I have a chance maybe of floating, and a chance maybe of getting out of the deep blue sea. Once I'm in hell for good. So it's sort of, I'm seeing in the chat lots of this left-right distinction is not useful. You're saying the left are going to support sex-based rights. I did not say that. I said that the left, if we actually look historically at who has supported the rights of women and the rights of lesbians, and I also speak here as a lesbian and as a radical lesbian feminist, if we look at historically which political parties we have a better chance of getting support for our issues and our causes and our rights and the rights of Indigenous people and the rights of the homeless and the rights of refugees and so on and so forth, we are far more likely to get that support from the political left, party political left, than from the party political right, which does not mean I am saying the party political left is wonderful, it's perfect, I will bow down and pray to them. I am not saying that. But if I am going to make political alliances and I am going to choose anyone, any person in the world, any woman, let's just keep the men out of the picture for a while, because I agree with the points Joe Brew was making, and possibly a lot of you here do as well. But if we're going to take any woman in the world who says gender ideology is terrible, we need to oppose it, then, and if I'm going to say, yes, that woman's my ally, then I think we have some serious political problems. Recently in Australia, a senator by the name of Pauline Hanson, who is the founder of an extreme right party called One Nation, put forward a proposal in the Australian Parliament for an inquiry into the transing of children, basically into gender medicine on children. Now, I would wholeheartedly support such an inquiry, but it was dead in the water as soon as the extreme right put it forward. If Pauline Hanson really wanted the inquiry to happen rather than, make political capital for her movement, then she would have handballed it on to somebody who was more moderate. She would have found a way for somebody more moderate to put it. She did not do that. So the interest for Pauline Hanson was not the issue. It was her political capital. So I think a lot of people in the Australian political space, and not just Australia, I'm looking at the US, I'm looking at a whole lot of other places, I'm looking at Macron in France, I'm looking at, the left in Spain and the right in Spain. Spain's like probably the worst scenario in Europe right now as concerns trans ideology. You may disagree with me, but I've heard a lot of things about what's going on in Spain right now. We have the whole political class wanting to make political capital out of this. We know they're going to do that. We absolutely know they're going to do that. But in terms of the sorts of broader values that I want defended, then I'm going to work on the left, because as far as I'm concerned, working on them with the right, it's dead in the water. I'm not going to get to the broader values on the political right.
And what we've I think it's so interesting that we can articulate this, and we could talk about it. Many of us have spent a lot of time in the left, or working with the left, or in unions or left-wing political parties, and been very, very frustrated by how patriarchal they are. And I think that, well, my experience is that we've seen political parties sort of out themselves as very, very patriarchal. So the Greens in Britain have there's been a press release coming from Green Women's Declaration that we're trying to put up on our website so everyone can see it. But the leadership are against the Cass review. So they're saying, well, no, we, the Greens, we don't really agree with the Cass report, which is just outrageous. So these traditionally left-wing and the Labour Party in Britain are awful. They've outed themselves as being so patriarchal that it's made a lot of people really question, who were traditionally on the left, question how honest they were, how much they really did believe in women's rights. But I think a lot of this whole issue of transgender ideology has thrown everything up in the air. And one of the things we managed to do at WDI is we've managed to be quite a broad organization, where we have the views of the working with the left, or working in the left, and the better the left than the right, and also the critique of the right that you're making, to say sometimes they might be good with one thing but they're not good with other things, and they're quite self-serving a lot of the time. So I think one of the things that's very useful is us to be able to open up these discussions and say, okay, so what is it of the left that we really still like, or what I think many of the women here have been or are on, or feel that they're on the left, but the left's betrayed them. And then you're articulating in a stronger way this sort of commitment, I guess, to trying to bring the left back to where we want it to be. And I think it's a very valid thing to do. It's sort of, it's good. Yeah.
There's a comment in the chat about not confusing left values with the parties. And I think that's an very important comment, because when I say I am of the political left, for me, radical feminism is by definition of the political left. And I don't mean Labour Party, I mean the political left in very broad terms. I'm not talking in political party terms. However, I reiterate that if we're looking for a party that is more likely to, I won't say fully embrace feminist values, because we know that, as I said before, parties are in this to make political capital. If they think it's going to win them votes or lose them votes, that's the way they jump. They will jump where they think they're going to win votes. And we know that. They jump where they're going to get donations from, big donors. That's what they're in the game for. They're in the game of power, and they will go in the direction of what is going to win them power. What our job is to convince political parties that, it's in their interest to support these values, because A, it's in their policy statements, the left-wing parties, and because that's how they got founded, and B, it's going to win them votes, because otherwise women are going to stop voting for them. So that's sort of the strategic game you're playing with political parties, but never in a month of Sundays, till my dying breath, till my last gasp, will I vote for the political right, because I know that that is going to send me straight to hell, and rather than into the deep blue sea. And I am not going to, I'm not going to dance with the devil. People are talking about, yeah, I agree with you about this person, about Pauline Hanson, but not about Kath Deves, not about Moira Deeming. Kath Deves and Moira Deeming have been courageous on the gender issue. Kath Deves is also part of the legal team, one of the junior members of the legal team, supporting Sal Grover in the Tickle versus Diggle case. So yes, they have been outspoken. I personally have no antipathy towards them. It's not about who I like or don't like, or who's pretty or who's not pretty. It's about what the broader values in terms of feminism are. And, and I can't, and I just can't get on board with defending women who are going to oppose women's reproductive rights. I just can't get on board with that. I can't get on board with allying with women who are going to say the Indigenous voice to parliament is a coup d'etat, and who are going to then get up and speak for monarchists. I just, there are
I think
lines.
it's very important as well that we don't allow ourselves to be aligned with the right, because that is the big strong vilification of TERFs or of gender abolitionists, is that we're right wing. And so that's strategically, I mean, apart from many of us not wanting to do it because we don't agree with the politics, it's disastrous if we do ally with the right, because that's the big argument against us. So I think both strategically and in terms of what our politics are. Can I ask you, what about France? Because you've been in France and you know a lot about France. Is there this left wing and right wing? Is there a group like French Feminists for Women's Rights, which is more allied with the left?
It's sort of in a moving space at the moment. There is Women's Declaration International France, as you would know, and I'm going to be doing a seminar for them next week. There's not next week, the week after. There's also something called the Observatoire de la Petite Sirène, the Observatory for the Little Mermaid, and I don't think of the Little Mermaid, and I don't think they knew about mermaids when they chose the name, but I think they chose the image of the mermaid as somebody who is transformed beyond being able to live. Yeah. So they are specifically working on the transing of children. They're doing so largely from a psychotherapeutic and medical perspective. They are not very clear on their left versus right politics, but they are doing an awful lot of good work. They're extremely active. There is an LGBT Alliance France, which is nascent. So there are various groups and individuals working in this space. Some of the people involved in the Observatoire have been feminists for many, many, many decades. There's Marie-Jo Bonnet, there's Liliane Condel, there's a few other very, very well-known feminists and lesbian activists involved in the sort of wider network of the Observatoire. But at the moment, things in France are sort of in a moving space. There is one senator who is with the Republicans. She's a right-wing senator who is sponsoring a conference that the Observatoire holding in the French Senate at the end of July, as I mentioned earlier. And the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, the president of that society is a gay psychotherapist who's Australian, who I know by the name of Roberto D'Angelo, and they are associating with that conference. I looked at the conference program. As per their mini conference last year, most of the speakers were men. Not quite as, the proportion is not quite as overwhelming this year as it was last year. I think there were 2 women. Silvia Barasco from Spain, who was terrific, and one other woman, I believe, who spoke last year. But that sort of male dominance on our side is not just the Observatoire. I've also noticed it with LGBT Alliance UK. I went to their conference in London in October last year, and out of the speaker lineup, 4 were women. So, it was very male dominated as well. And it was very sort of top down. It was all plenaries. There were no workshops. So that sort of problem of working with men. But getting back to alliances with the right, in a forward, we don't say, we will not talk to anyone from the right wing. We will not associate with them. We will not look sideways at them. That's actually not what we do. However, we do choose our battles and we choose our alliances. We have been part of a campaign in the state of New South Wales, Australia being a federal system, as Megan Blake explained so very well last week. what's in the Australian Federal Constitution is what was constitutionalised at the time of federation, at the time of independence. And because the states had a lot of power as former colonies, most of these things happen at state level. So all the gender legislation is happening at state level, enabled by 2013 amendments to the Federal Sex Discrimination Act, which Megan also talked about last week. If you haven't seen her presentation, I do strongly recommend you go and have a look. It's very, very good. In New South Wales, so I was talking about federal versus state legislation. So what's all the legislation about the gender stuff is enabled by the Sex Discrimination Act, but it's happening on state level. So there's the only one way that the federal government can swoop in and override state legislation is if the state legislation contravenes federal legislation, which it does not at this point in time, given the amendments to the Federal Sex Discrimination Act. In New South Wales, FORWA has been part of a coalition of groups who were sort of either explicitly on the left or who are on the left without sort of quite saying so, and who have been campaigning in New South Wales. Now, of course, the only people in New South Wales who will even talk to us are the right. So we have had meetings with members of the Liberal Party. We did have one meeting very early on with the secretary, with the assistant to the, I forget his actual title, but he's assistant to the State Attorney General. And he was very receptive. And we thought, goody, we've got an in. But when we started to follow up with this guy, we got the blanket blowing off type of form letter that the ALP is sending out to everybody. So clearly someone got to him. He was sort of half opened a door to talk to us, but then the whole party caucus shut it down again. So because I think more so than any other party, I'm pretty sure this is probably the case in the UK as well, you have to toe the party line in the Labour Party. And even a member of the Labour Party who's actually on the Labour right, but he is in the Labour Party, who is ferociously opposed to this ideology, he voted with his party in New South Wales recently too, or he would have been kicked out of the party. He's working underground with us, but he didn't cross the floor because it's not a conscience vote. You have to vote with your party. So if he hadn't voted with his party, he would have been expelled from the party and no good to any of us because we actually need insiders in the party trying to help us out with information. Unfortunately, so far we have lost the battle in New South Wales, the so-called conversion therapy ban, which we think is a misnomer because we know that it's legislation mandating trans conversion on children. And that was passed in New South Wales. It's less awful than the Victorian law. It's probably less awful than any of the other laws, but it's still basically the same principle is operating in the New South Wales law. There is another bill in the New South Wales Parliament, which was put by an independent who nobody really likes, but everybody needs to work with because they need his alliance to get them over the line on certain things. That's an so-called equality bill, and it's an omnibus bill. It amends over 20 different pieces of state legislation. It touches on everything: prostitution, surrogacy, minors seeking medical treatment without parental consent, and so on and so forth. Again, as a coalition, we're trying to work within our separate organizations, but also together to try to lobby against that bill getting up. We may have a better chance of that. It's been sent off to an inquiry, to a committee for inquiry, and they are going to hold public hearings. Some of our groups have been invited to speak at that hearing. Coalition of Activist Lesbians, Feminist Legal Clinic, and Women's Rights Network Australia have been invited to speak. FORWA hasn't, LGBT Alliance hasn't. We're not quite sure why, but that's who they have invited. That's good because some of our coalitions are getting a hearing on that particular bill. So any progress we make is progress. And just to reiterate, getting back to this left versus right thing and political parties and so on and so forth, we were formed explicitly to come at the left from its left flank. That's what FORWA was about. That's what we were set up to do. We were not set up to say they're all patriarchs and we'll just ally with anybody who's critical of gender ideology. That's not what we were about, because I understand women's frustration. I understand our frustration with left-wing parties, some of which we may have voted for all our lives. I understand women's absolute disgust. I resigned from my own trade union. I was brought up trade union. I resigned from the past members association of my own trade union, of which I was a former branch president and founder even of its national queer caucus, because of their stance on gender ideology. So, you know, it's not like I'm supporting these people, right?
So we're now going to hear from Nicolette, Szagmeiszter, also known as Nicolette Hoffman. She's from Hungary. She's a women's rights defender, Hague mother, and feminist policy analyst in EU affairs. She's pressurizing the European Parliament to support a campaign for Nikki's Law. And the title of Nicolette's talk is Campaigning for Nikki's Law in the EU, Why the EU Legislature Cannot Enslave Primary Caregiver Mums any longer. So thank you so much, Nicolette, for coming on. And can you tell us about Nikki's Law and what it means and why it's necessary?
Roughly 1 year ago, I was here on Feminist Question Time. That time I was at a scholarship in London, and I have been talking already about the situation in the European Union, which maybe you would not believe. It's like in Afghanistan. Mothers, after the separation or divorce from the child's father, have no rights. As Kate Millett wrote in the 70s in her groundbreaking book, Sexual Politics, women are dead in the law. So I have been talking about this already, as I said to you last year, on Feminist Question Time. And I spent a couple of months now, as coordinator for VDI in Hungary, which I had to give up because my campaign and my work to get back my own rights, my family's rights, which have been assassinated in the European Union many years ago, is such a big burden on my body, on my spirit, on my soul, that I must be single focused. So what's going on in the European Union, to all of you who haven't heard this, the European Union is a key promoter, as a legislator, is a key promoter of the tyrannical Hague Child Abduction Convention, which doesn't deserve to be named as law. Within Europe, we know that the Nazis in the 30s made laws, so-called laws, which doesn't deserve to be named as law because they assassinated the human rights and the existence of certain people. Not only Jews, also gays, political opponents have been assassinated as persons in the law, which is adopted in Germany. So after the Second World War, what's happened? They started to analyze how could this happen in a functioning country, that the state itself make laws which are legal and which ruin people's and society, people's lives in society. So Gustav Radbruch, to going back to the Hague, Gustav Radbruch was a German former minister before the Nazis came to power, Minister of Justice. And he wrote in 1946 his groundbreaking study. When we want to understand why mothers have no right in the European Union, we need to understand what the Hague Child Abduction Convention is, why it should not be implemented in the EU. And in order to understand the Hague Convention, we need to go back how the Nazis made laws. The Nazis singled out certain groups of people, Jews, gays, political opponents, disabled people. They took away all of their human rights as a human being and made them dead in the law. And Radbruch developed a formula in 1946. He said a law which doesn't even attempt to give justice and to guarantee equality in the law doesn't deserve to be named as law. So when we have a look at the Hague Child Abduction Convention, which is adopted in 1980, we see that the Hague Child Abduction Convention doesn't give any right for the primary caregiver parent of the child who must flee from a country from unbearable conditions with the child, or who simply want to return into her or his home country with the child, but the non-resident parent has in the convention anyway right to see the child. So the Hague Child Abduction Convention, when we analyze it, we realize that it would not pass the Radbruch test. It is not a law because it doesn't have the intention to protect everybody, primary caregivers, non-resident parents, and the child itself from harmful situations. The only goal of the Hague Child Abduction Convention is, if you read it in Article 1, it is declared to protect the custody right of the left behind parent, who is, what a miracle, in 85% still today the father. So the Hague Child Abduction Convention is a father's rights law which protects the right of the left behind father, in most of the cases violent, who was left behind by the mother who had to flee from unbearable situations with the child into another country, and who is in many other cases criminalized for saving her own life and for saving the child's life. So what we know that this law should not be implemented within the Hague Child Abduction Convention, within the European Union, because it conflicts with primary European Union law, with the Charter, with the Treaty on European Union, with everything. But it's still implemented between the EU member states. So if you move from one member state into another as a mother to offer your child a better life because the father is not paying, or he's violent and you are not protected, you are the bad one. You are the bad one, you are the child abductor who face draconian punishment. The father can, and the left behind father can start a child return proceeding against you. Even though if you are a primary caregiver, you can be obliged to return the child into a country where the violent father lives. So either you return into a horrible situation where you are not protected, or you give up your child. So we see now a lot of campaigns have been going on now against the Hague Child Abduction Convention, and UN Rapporteur Reem Al-Salam and Dr. Alice Gill-Edwards also wrote to the Hague Conference on Private Law that the Hague Child Abduction Convention is not okay. It's not okay what's going on. But within the European Union, we have better tools. We don't have to beg on our knees for the Hague Conference on International Private Law and for the over 100 signatory states. Within the European Union, if you know well EU law, you can realize easily that we have the possibility and the obligation to banish the Hague Child Abduction Convention from the entire EU, between the EU member states, and develop a better law, a better EU regulation, which analyzes the whole situation from a new point of view. Why do parents, mostly mothers, need to flee with their children from an EU member state? Because they are coerced into poverty, because the father is not paying, or because the state is not willing to protect them from violence. So I have started to campaign now for Nikki's law, because we can amend secondary European Union law and even the Charter to regulate mother's situation, children's situation, and even safe father's situation in a lawful way. We don't have to do it, we must do it. So Nikki's law is based on my own situation when I was coerced in 2010 to remain in Belgium as a primary caregiver mother from my own money, according to the wish of the French father who was living in France. That's the Hague Child Abduction Convention, which says you must remain in a country where your child used to live if this is what the other parent wants. It doesn't regulate what happens if parents live in different countries or in different EU member states. The EU in its current form didn't exist at all in 1980 when the Hague Child Abduction Convention was adopted. So according to the Hague Child Abduction Convention and according to the later Brussels II regulation, which is EU law, the primary caregiver mother or father, let's go back to the mother, must remain in an EU member state where she lives with her child, even when the father doesn't live there, and she must uphold the child's place of residence with the extra cost according to the non-resident father's demand. And if you don't do if you don't want to do this, you must still remain in this member state with your child until the court maybe gives you a permission to leave this country. It can take years, and maybe the court says, no, you cannot leave a country with your child, even though the father lives somewhere else and enjoys his life. So I moved anyway back to my home country, Hungary. I was hugged, which means the father demanded that I return the child to Belgium. even though he was not living there. I was threatened that if I don't return my child to Belgium, he can be put in state care, because it's more important, according to the Hague Child Abduction Convention and the best practice guides, that the child lives in a country without the primary caregiver than to have a good life with a primary caregiver in another country. So this is the utmost assassination of the right to family life, the right to happy childhood, because it cannot be more important in the European Union that the child lives with a loving primary caregiver and extended family grandparents than to remain in a country. So Nikki's law wants to change this, and I'm campaigning now for the urgent amendment of secondary European law, the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and as a first step, for the banishment of the Hague Child Abduction Convention in those cases when the parents don't live in the same member states. This will entitle primary caregiver parents to relocate the child into another member state immediately when they are homeless, or even if they just want to do this when the non-resident parent lives in another country. So this will give back the women and mothers their autonomy to move, to be on the move, to relocate the child, not be a doormat of the non-resident father, not be a doormat of the court, not be coerced into prostitution. Because imagine, how can you provide for your child if you don't have a decent job in the member states during many years until the court maybe gives you permission to relocate the child? So I start now to campaign for Nikki's law, with the all European parliaments, which is still working. We have parliamentary elections, EP elections in June. And also with the current commission, with the new commission, saying, I am a mother, this happened to me, I lost my entire financial existence, I'm not stupid, I'm a policy analyst in EU affairs with more than 20 years of experience. You must entitle the primary caregiver parent to relocate the child into another EU member state when the non-resident parent doesn't live there or he lives outside of the EU. And this will be a women's liberation, I think, because most parents are good parents. They want to give a better life for the child. So that's Nikki's law.
That's great. And where, when are you going to launch this campaign? How are you going to?
That is now the launch. This is now the launch. This is now the first time I'm saying, because I will send to you and to Shia and to Maureen also the papers which I sent to you, because my time as a Women's Declaration International volunteer has given me so much, has given me so much courage. It took me now more than 1 year to develop the courage to launch this and to say this and to rock the boat, and not to be silent, not to say, well, I was a victim of domestic violence. No, the law is bad. The law belongs to the dustbin.
Will you lobby the European Union, the commissioners and the European parliamentarians?
Yes,
how will that happen?
I'm working now with more whistleblowers. First, you need to make a complaint because the law is bad. The Hague Child Abduction Convention belongs to the dustbin. And what you can do, you can make as a direct victim of the situation of the Hague Child Abduction Convention and the new Council Regulation 2201/2003, which is now replaced with a new one. So I'm victim of EU law and the Hague Convention, and I can make a complaint to the European Parliament, to the European Commission, based on the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. I'm entitled to justice and to restitution, financial restitution, justice, because I have been nearly imprisoned just because I moved back from Belgium to my home country, Hungary.
How will they define who's the primary caregiver?
The primary caregiver can be defined, good question, in two ways: either who lives with the child and raises the child, or who has a judgment. We had already a divorce judgment which named me as the primary caregiver.
What safeguarding is there from your point of view that this is going to be better for women? Because the Hague Convention at the moment will stop men abducting children and taking them abroad. So how's that going to, will that be replaced if, you know,
no,
so
we have
what's to stop men?
We must replace the Hague child abduction. So we see that men are not necessarily abducting their children abroad. Most of the men don't abduct the child abroad. They don't want to have their children. 85 or 95% of the fathers even don't want to see their children. Many fathers don't want to see the children pay. They want to get rid of the child. That's not our problem. Our problem is the patriarchal or domestic terrorist of the father who uses the child in order to punish the mother. We also know that in the child custody proceeding or child abduction or the real child abduction cases, those fathers abduct the child who are violent domestic terrorists. Within the European Union, if the child is abducted within the European Union, we must make a difference who abducted the child really de facto and from whom. According to the Hague Child Abduction Convention, when the child was de facto abducted from the primary caregiver parent, mostly the mother, by a violent father who might kill the child, who is a domestic terrorist or patriarchal terrorist, we have the same measure as if the primary caregiver parent, predominantly the mother, was fleeing from the patriarchal terrorist. You know what I mean? So it's discrimination. Hague Child Abduction Convention and EU law treats two different situations in the same way. For them, it is equal. You violated the custody right of the parent. No. In one case, the non-resident or even cohabiting violent parent who is a threat to the life of the child, mostly the father, but can be also the mother, who is a terrorist, a domestic terrorist who abducts the child and who is on the way to kill the child. We know these parents who abduct the children, in many cases, kill the child. And then the other case, we have the primary caregiver who must flee in order not to be killed. How can you treat me the same way? Within the EU, we need a new regulation which makes a very clear difference and defines domestic terrorism and entitles the safe parent always to flee from the child. So and we can bring back the children within the EU who have been abducted by the domestic terrorists through police cooperation. We don't need civil measures. The police must come and bring back the child within hours because the child might be killed. You cannot wait 6 weeks for a Hague proceedings. You know what I mean?
Can you tell us a bit about Hungary? Just what, even if there's nothing happening in Hungary, but in terms of gender identity ideology, is there anything happening? Are there any NGOs that are promoting it?
Hungary is a very specific cookie because Hungary is one of the only countries which doesn't allow you change your gender, your sex. So even if you have sex surgery, sex reassignment surgery, and you look like a woman, you are named Joseph on your ID and everybody's laughing about you. So Hungary has been really in battle with the EU, but Hungary doesn't recognize in the constitution that you can change your sex. So it is a constitutional right to be a man or a woman. Goodbye. Most of the Hungarians support this. NGOs would like to, we have now a big legal fight with the European Union because the European Union wants entitled NGOs to come into schools and to lecture children about gender identity ideology. And Hungary doesn't want this. Hungary says the NGOs which lectures about this and that, they don't have a place in our schools. So we don't want to have the situation, or the government doesn't want to have the situation like in the United Kingdom, where children have been transitioned behind the back, socially transitioned behind the back of their parents in the school. This cannot happen in Hungary. So the European Commission and 14 member states, 14 have now lawsuit against Hungary at the Court of Justice to coerce Hungary to let NGOs into the schools and lecture about gender identity ideology. And that's stunning that the European Union is oppressing primary caregiver parents, mostly mothers, to give their children a safe life and to flee from the domestic terrorist who's going to kill you. But they are busy now that the NGOs have the right to teach children about gender identity ideology and all kind of stuff. That's the one thing which is going on in Hungary. So Orbán said, not on my watch. He has 99% support in the whole country for this. And then we had a pedophile scandal. You know, Hungary had the Hungarian president, Katalin Novak, and also the Minister of Justice, Judith Varga, had to resign because they all signed a pardon for a pedophile accomplice. There was a children's home in Bicske where the director was a pedophile. He was sexually assaulting the little boys who were in state care, and he had a deputy director who helped him. I was not there, but media says to cover up. And this man, this deputy director, was also imprisoned, and he received a presidential pardon signed by the Minister of Justice, saying that he's now entitled to work with children. And there was such a big scandal. Hungarians are not protesting too much, but there was such a big scandal in Hungary that thousands of people, 100,000, went to the street and say, Judith Varga, you must disappear from public life. Hungarians don't like pedophiles. You cannot cover up pedophilia. So both the president, she was a strong ally of Orbán, and also Judith Varga, Minister of Justice, they had to resign.
Wow.
And Judith Varga should have led the European Fidesz party list for the European elections. And now she's kicked out from public life, all in all.
So this is an essay that I wrote, which is on Substack, and it's called A Three-Way War on Women. And the picture that you can see has God the Father on the right with a beard, God the Son on the left, Jesus, and then God the Holy Spirit in the middle. And they're all sort of, well, putting a crown on or shining a light on Mary, the woman. Right, so it's called A Three-Way War over Women. So we're in the middle of a three-way ideological war. It's worldwide, patterned on the patriarchal myth of the Christian Trinity, and it's about control over women. So the current three-way ideological war can be seen as an acting out and recreation of the Christian myth. It's a fight between the gods, God the Father, that's the patriarchs, right wing, who say it's natural that women are dominated, e.g. Putin, Orbán, the Pope, Matt Walsh, or David Starkey. And God the Son, who are the brotherhood. So it's the fratriarchs, the left wing, the socialists, brotherhoods, e.g. Trudeau, the European Union, I'm defining as a brotherhood or a fratriarchal organization, so the younger men, the United Nations, the BBC. And so this is the left, and then God the Holy Spirit, who could be the third aspect of man's collective will. So the transiarchs, I've called them, but the transgender ideologists, genderist, boundary-breaking men who say they have become women, e.g. Dylan Mulvaney or Eddie Izzard, and we know loads of other ones. So the war is over women as in land or territory or resources or people. It's a war over who will get control, who will get us, who will control us. So it's a fight between men, and the victor will get us. But it's also a war over the minds and souls. So they, the men, are fighting to win women's hearts and minds as well as control us. So to win this war, they need to also win women over, to offer us something, to win our consent or our reluctant submission, or in some cases of the woke women, eager enrollment. And it's tricky for the men because they need to tread a fine line. They need to signal that men who follow them will get their loot, their booty, a woman or some women. But they also need to convince enough women to buy into the deal. And I'm saying you could see it like churches who have been losing churchgoers. They're advertising their version of Christianity, aiming to get the flock back onto the pews. So that the men are not fighting to overthrow patriarchy. So none of these men who speak against transgender ideology or for it want to overthrow patriarchy. They're arguing about how best to run patriarchy. Sometimes some of their arguments and actions align with some of ours, but none of them want free women. They want bigger flocks, us being the sheep. In this three-way struggle, it's crucial for women to remember that our enemy's enemy is not our friend. The war is over us, women, females, and they are all our enemies. To illustrate what's going on, imagine a stadium. In the middle of the stage, there are three men in a triangle facing each other for combat. They wear mics and body cameras. A massive crowd looks on, waving flags, cheering for their champion. Large screens show close-ups of their faces and speakers amplify their words, so everyone can hear. In the centre, between the three men, is a beautiful young woman looking unsure. She will have to choose one of the men and go with him. He will be the winner. The crowd will also vote. The first man is oldish, 60-ish, bearded, strong, authoritative, conservative. He's God the Father, the patriarch, wearing blue. The second man is younger, in his 30s, wearing a Che Guevara t-shirt. He has a socialist red star tattoo on his muscled bicep. He's God the Son. And the third man is younger still, a drag queen in his early 20s, long-haired, wearing a pink dress, high heels, lipstick and nail varnish, and he's God the Holy Spirit. Each man has earphones and is being fed arguments from teams of supporters. Many of the supporters are women who give their ideas to the men, glad to have their words spoken, their ideas shared in the arena. The crowd wave their flags to show who they support. Blue for the patriarch, red for the fratriarch, and pink for the transgender ideologist or transiarch. But the majority of the crowd is silent, flagless, fence-sitting. The scene is set, but wait, the blue and red crowds, there's a small group with purple, green and white flags singing, led by a middle-aged woman with short grey hair. You can just make out, if a person's got a penis, he's a man. If a person's got a penis, he's a man. These are the radical feminists, many in adult human female shirts. But their song is drowned out by the rest of the crowd, and our attention is drawn by the official commentator telling us the show's starting. Sometime during the show, one of the pink crowd lunges at a radical feminist and grabs her flag. The stewards notice and kick the women out of the stadium for causing trouble. So that's us being kicked out of the fight, and the whole war over women is there we are being silenced because somebody attacked us. The patriarch starts. He offers the young woman in the centre his hand and says she will have freedom of speech, a secure, safe home, dignity. He uses the nature argument. It's natural that women and men are different sexes and they play different but complementary roles. All this newfangled feminist woke nonsense is awful. He supports women-only sports. He blames the transgender ideologists or the transiarchs for breaking down society and invading women's spaces. He abhors the support of this gender fluidity that comes from the left, who he says are totalitarians. He will provide a strong, stable community that offers protection within capitalism. He's a good family man, a churchgoer, and distrusts the fratriarch's motives. Why are they promoting drag queen story time to children? So that was God the Father. He uses some of the arguments that have been articulated by feminists for years, but does not credit them. In this spirit, Matt Walsh's film, What is a Woman, and we've had loads of examples of this, haven't we, did not mention the work done by radical feminist groups like Wolf or WDI USA. Although both groups are significant players, it seems that the patriarchs have decided the best way to deal with the threat that the young woman might decide they like radical feminists, or young women, more than the patriarchs, is never mention the radical feminists exist, and never give us a platform. After all, he notices that the women with the suffragette flags have been ejected from the stadium. Now it's the fratriarch's turn. He's a union member and in the leftist party. He works for the government and can get the young women a job in the capital. She will get good wages and conditions, and this benefit is thanks to the heroic struggle of the brotherhood and sisters who fought capitalism to create a caring state. She will have free healthcare, education, job, equality. There'll be free abortion on demand and access to contraception. The real issue, he says, is poverty, and that affects women worst. He's her man to solve the problems. And anyway, the fratriarch, he explains, has teamed up. So he's the union guy, has teamed up with the transgender ideologists, the transiarchs, who are championing the most oppressed of all, the LGBTQ++. And so joining him, the left, will be as good as joining the transiarchs, the transgender ideologists, so God, the Holy Spirit, the glorious history of socialism on his side, and all those professions, all the unions and organizations and political parties, all those brotherhoods to be part of, she'll be justified and virtuous if she joins his group. And then in the fight over who's going to win this woman's trust and vote, the young transiarch goes next. He throws off his pink coat and reveals a glorious body in a skimpy dress. He doesn't address the young woman, but turns to the crowd. First, his pink-clad crowd, and then the whole crowd. He bursts into song. Oh, come on, go on, you adore me, you know you want it. The crowd roar delightedly, and showers of rainbow glitter explode from all directions onto the stage. A genderbread man dashes onto the pitch and skips around. He smiles patronizingly to the young woman and says she's gorgeous and she could be part of his gang. He invites her to the opening of his new West End show and gives her a hug. You don't want those old men, he says. Come with me and let's make feminism fun again. I'll just see how much. Oh, it's very nearly finished this. So the opening speech is over. Now come the sporting women. The patriarch has a conservative mother to speak up. The fratriarch, a female politician, to reiterate the benefits of the brotherhood fraternity. And the transiarch is supported by a trans woman, a young man with lipstick who sobs when he recounts how he bravely fights bigotry in his university. She should join him. The conservative mother attacks the immoral drag queen story time. The socialist politician attacks the patriarchs as anti-abortion, and the trans woman attacks the patriarchs for banning queers in Hungary. Well, just what Nicolette has just told us. Because this war is over women, our word, the word woman, our bodies, whether we're a sex class or a sex caste, and because men want to win us over, they're using women and women's arguments to help them. So it's not just controlling us, it's also they want us to think that they're on our side, which we know they're not. The men take our arguments, twist them and shape them to suit patriarchy, and then sell them back to the population as if they were theirs. They shake up the ideas and find how to make money from them, and then peddle and distort this distorted offer of liberation to the desperate population of young women. Because they control the means of communication, they silence us. It's like Big Pharma selling HRT as a cure for menopause and funding websites and articles problematizing menopause, platforming women who had a hard time during the change, and silencing those of us who found that sage tea and a long walk did the trick. It's worse than that, but it's similar to that. It's that pattern over and over. So it's essential, if the young woman is to choose one of the men, never to mention the actual radical feminists, which is done by all the men. It's helpful, if this is to work, to vilify the radical feminists, to warn young women that radical feminists are beyond the pale, devils, in relation to this godly trinity. The work is done very well by the supporting women, who are rewarded with honours and well-paid jobs. But make no mistake, none of these men want women to be free. When this fight is over, they will turn on us with renewed energy. They don't want free women. They want bigger flocks. The Trinity are the three faces of patriarchal God, and that God is one. Men might favour one face, say God the Father, but roll out the Son or the Holy Spirit from time to time. Other men might prefer the Spirit or the Son, but refer to the Father when necessary. Behind the conflict is unity. The man-made trio has worked well at controlling women for 2 millennia, and they're using that structure again in a sublimated form, but in a similar form. This way of looking at the gender wars is sparked by the insight from Mary Daly. And her insight was that man-made myths structure society and shape the future. So in her writing, she said that the Christian Trinity myth both structures society, but it makes the new society because it's such a core structural part of our society. And whether it's an insight, it's hopefully it's got people thinking a bit about why, how well it works, the fact that it's so confusing, and that there's this three-way war, so you can look at one of the men and think they're good in relation to the others. They might be on our side, but I suppose the insight is they're all bad and they're all just trying to control us. So our job is to break that pattern and wrench us to a different track.